Story 2. I was traveling for a long time in different areas, having my companion, the prayer of Jesus, which heartened me in all journeys, in all meetings with people, and in all the situations. I started to feel that it would be better for me to stay alone more often, so as to be able to keep by myself and study Philokalia. Although I read it whenever I found accommodation for the night or rested during the day, I greatly wished to go more and more deeply into it, and with faith and genuine prayer to learn from it, teaching about the truth for the salvation of my soul. However, in spite of all of the wishes, I couldn't find any work that I was able to do, because I seriously damaged my left arm when I was a child. I decided to go into Siberia, to the tomb of Saint Innocent of Irkutsk. My idea was that in the forests and steeps of Siberia, I could travel in silence that was better for prayer and reading. I undertook the journey, all the while saying my oral prayer without stopping. In a while, I had the feeling that the prayer had by its own action passed from my lips to my heart. It seemed as though my heart in its ordinary beating began to say the words of the prayer within at each beat. 1. Lord. 2. Jesus. 3. Christ. And so on. I gave up saying the prayer with my lips. I simply listened carefully to what my heart was saying. My eyes looked right down into it, and I dwelt upon the words of my departed elder when he was telling me about this joy. Then I felt something like a slight pain in my heart, and in my thoughts so great a love for Christ that I pictured myself, if only I could see him, throwing myself at his feet and not letting them go from my embrace, kissing them tenderly, and thanking him with tears for having of his love and grace allowed me to find so great a consolation in his name, me, his unworthy and sinful creature. Further, my heart was full of gracious warmth that spread through my whole chest. This moved me to a still closer reading of Philokalia, in order to test my feelings and to make a thorough study of the secret prayer in the heart. Without such testing, I was afraid of falling a victim to the mere charm of it, or of taking natural effects for the effects of grace, and of giving way to pride at my quick learning of the prayer. My departed elder told me about it many times. For this reason, I took to walking more by night, and chose to spend my days reading Philokalia, sitting down under a tree in the forest. Ah, what wisdom, such as I had never known before, was shown me by this reading. Giving myself up to it, I felt a delight which till then I had never been able to imagine. It is true that many places were still beyond my dull mind, but my prayer in the heart brought with it the clearing up of things I did not understand. Sometimes I saw my departed elder in a dream, and he threw light upon many things, and, most of all, guided my ignorant soul more and more toward humility. In this blissful state, I passed more than 2 months of the summer. For the most part, I went through the forests. When I came to a village, I asked only for a bag of dried bread and a handful of salt. I filled my jar with water and went for another 100 miles or so. Toward the end of the summer, temptation began to attack me. Perhaps as a result of the sins on my wretched soul. Perhaps as something needed in the spiritual life. Perhaps as the best way of giving me teaching and experience. A clear case in point was the following. One day when I came out onto the main road as twilight was falling, 2 men with shaved heads who looked like a couple of soldiers came up to me. They demanded money. When I told them that I had not a farthing on me, they would not believe me, and shouted insolently, "You're lying. Wanderers always have a lot of money. What's the good of arguing with him?" said one of them, and gave me such a blow on the head with his oak stick that I dropped senselessly. I don't know whether I remained senseless long, but when I came to, I found myself lying in the forest by the roadside. I was robbed. My bag had gone. All that was left of it were the cords from which it hung, which they had cut. Thank God they had not stolen my passport, which I carried in my old cap so as to be able to show it as quickly as possible on demand. I got up weeping bitterly, not so much on account of the pain in my head, as for the loss of my books, the Bible and Philokalia, which were in the stolen bag. Day and night I did not cease to weep and lament. Where was it now? My Bible, which I had always carried with me, and which I had always read from my youth onward. Here was my love to kindness, from which I gained so much teaching and consolation. O unhappy me, to have lost the first and last treasures of my life before having had my fill of them. It would have been better to be killed outright than to live without this spiritual food. I can't buy it once again. For 2 days I just dragged myself along. I was so crushed by the weight of my misfortune. On the 3rd, I quite reached the end of my strength, and dropping down in the accommodation of a bush, I fell asleep. And then I had a dream. I was back at the monastery in the cell of my elder, deploring my loss. The old man was trying to comfort me. He said, "Let this be a lesson to you in detachment from earthly things, for your better advance toward heaven. This has been allowed to happen to you, to save you from falling into the mere enjoyment of spiritual things. God would have the Christian absolutely renounce all his desires and delights and attachments, and to submit himself entirely to his divine will. He orders every event for the help and salvation of man. He willeth that all men should be saved. 1. Take courage, then, and believe that God will, with the temptation, provide also a way of escape. 2. Soon you will be rejoicing much more than you are now distressed." At these words I awoke, feeling my strength come back to me and my soul full of light and peace. "God's will be done," I said. I crossed myself, got up, and went on my way. The prayer again began to be active in my heart, as before, and for 3 days I went along in peace. All at once I came upon a body of convicts with their military escort. When I came up to them, I recognized the 2 men who had robbed me. They were in the outside file, and so I fell at their feet and earnestly begged them to tell me what they had done with my books. At first they paid no heed to me, but in the end one of them said, "If you will give us something, we will tell you where your books are. Give us a coin." I swore to them that even if I had to beg the coin from someone for the love of God, I would certainly give it to them, and by way of the pledge, I offered them my passport. Then they told me that my books were in the wagons which followed the prisoners, among all the other stolen things they were found with. "How can I get them?" asked the officer in charge of us. I hurried to the officer and told him the whole story. "Can you really read the Bible?" he asked me. "Yes," I answered. "Not only can I read everything, but what is more, I can write too. You will see a signature in the Bible which shows it is mine, and here is my passport, showing the same name and surname." He then told me about the rascals. They were deserters living in a mud hut in the forest, and that they had plundered many people. He told me that a clever driver, whose trio of horses they had tried to steal, had captured them the day before. "All right," he added, "I will give you your books back if they are there, but you come with us as far as our halting place for the night. It is only a little over 2 miles. Then I need not stop the whole convoy and the wagons just for your sake." I agreed to this gladly, and as I walked along at the horse's side, we began to talk. I saw that he was a kindly and honest fellow, and no longer young. He asked me who I was, where I came from, and where I was going. I answered all his questions without hiding anything, and so we reached the house which marked the end of the day's march. He found my books and gave them back to me, saying, "Where are you going now night has come on?" "Stay here and sleep in my anteroom." So I stayed. Now that I had my books again, I was so glad that I did not know how to thank God. I clasped the books to my chest and held them there so long that my hands got quite numb. I shed tears of joy, and my heart beat with delight. The officer watched me and said, "You must love reading your Bible very much." But such was my joy that I could not answer him. I could only weep. Then he went on to say, "I also read the Gospel regularly every day, brother." He produced a small copy of the Gospels, printed in Kiev, and bound in silver, saying, "Sit down, and I will tell you how it came about." "Hello there, let us have some supper," he shouted. We drew up to the table, and the officer began his story. "Ever since I was a young man, I have been with the army in the field, and not on garrison service. I knew my job, and my superior officers liked me for a conscientious second lieutenant. Still, I was young, and so were my friends. Unhappily, I took to drink, and drunkenness became a regular passion with me. So long as I kept away from the drink, I was a good officer, but when I gave way to it, I was no good for anything for 6 weeks at a time. They bore with me for a long while, but the end of it was that after being thoroughly rude while drunk to my commanding officer, I was cashiered and transferred to a garrison as a private soldier for 3 years. I was threatened with still more severe punishment if I did not give up drinking and mend my ways. Even in this miserable state of affairs, however much I tried, I could not regain my self-control nor cure myself. I found it impossible to get rid of my passion for drink, and it was decided to send me to a disciplinary court. When I was informed of this, I was at my wit's end. I was in barracks, occupied with my wretched thoughts, when there arrived a monk who was going around collecting for a church. We each of us gave him what we could. He came up to me and asked me why I was so unhappy, and I talked to him and told him my troubles. He sympathized with me and said, "The same thing happened to my own brother, and what do you think helped him? His spiritual father gave him a copy of the Gospels with strict orders to read a chapter without a moment's delay, every time he felt a longing for wine coming over him. If the desire continued, he was to read a second chapter, and so on. That is what my brother did, and at the end of a very short time, his drunkenness came to an end. It is now 15 years since he touched a drop of alcohol. You do the same, and you will see how that will help you. I have a copy of the Gospels, which you must let me bring you." I listened to him, and then I said, "How can your Gospels help me, since all efforts of my own and all the medical treatment have failed to stop me drinking?" I talked in that way, because I had as yet never been in the habit of reading the Gospels. "Don't say that," replied the monk. "I assure you that it will be a help." As a matter of fact, the next day he brought me this very copy. I opened it, took a glance, and said, "I can't accept it. I am not used to Church Slavonic and don't understand it." But the monk went on to assure me that in the very words of the Gospel there lay a gracious power, for in them was written what God himself had spoken. It does not matter very much if at first you don't understand. Go on reading diligently. A monk once said, "If you don't understand the word of God, the devils understand what you are reading, and tremble, and your drunkenness is certainly the work of devils." And here is another thing I will tell you. St. John Chrysostom writes that even a room in which a copy of the Gospels is kept holds the spirits of darkness at bay and becomes an unpromising field for their wiles. I forget what I gave the monk, but I brought his book of the Gospels, put it away in a trunk with my other things, and forgot it. Some while afterward, a bout of drunkenness threatened me. An irresistible desire for drink drove me hurriedly to open my trunk to get some money and rush off to the public house. But the first thing my eyes fell on was the copy of the Gospels, and all the monk had said came back vividly to my mind. I opened the book and began to read the first chapter of St. Matthew. I got to the end of it without understanding a word. Still, I remembered that the monk had said, "No matter if you don't understand, go on reading diligently." "Come," said I must read the second chapter." I did so and began to understand a little. So I started on the 3rd chapter, and then the barracks bell began to ring. Everyone had to go to bed. No one was allowed to go out, and I had to stay where I was. When I got up in the morning, I was just on the point of going out to get some wine, when I suddenly thought, supposing I were to read another chapter, what would be the result? I read it, and I did not go to the public house. Again, I felt the craving, and again I read a chapter. I felt a certain amount of relief. This encouraged me, and from that time on, whenever I felt the need for a drink, I used to read a chapter from the Gospels. What is more, as time went on, things got better, and by the time I had finished all 4 Gospels, my drunkenness was absolutely a thing of the past, and I felt nothing but disgust for it. It is just 20 years now since I drank a drop of alcohol. Everybody was astonished at the change brought about in me. Some 3 years later, my commission was restored to me. In due course, I was promoted and finally got my majority. I married. I am blessed with a good wife. We have made a position for ourselves, and so, thank God, we go on living our life. As far as we can, we help the poor and give hospitality to wanderers. Why, now I have a son who is an officer and a first-rate fellow. And mark this, since the time when I was cured of drunkenness, I have lived under a vow to read the Gospels every single day of my life, 1 whole Gospel in every 24 hours, and I let nothing whatever hinder me. I do this still. If I am exceedingly pressed with business and unusually tired, I lie down and get my wife or my son to read the whole of one of the evangelists to me, and so avoid breaking my rule. By way of thanksgiving and for the glory of God, I have read this book of the Gospels mounted in pure silver, and I always carry it in my chest pocket. I listened with great joy to this story of his. I also have come across a case of the same sort, I told him. At the factory in our village, there was a craftsman, very skillful at his job, and a good, kindly fellow. Unhappily, however, he also drank, and very often at that. A certain God-fearing man advised him, when the desire for drink seized him, to repeat the prayer of Christ 33 times, in honor of the Holy Trinity, and in memory of the 33 years of the earthly life of Christ. He took his advice and started to carry it out, and very soon he quite gave up drinking. And, what is more, 3 years later he went into a monastery. And which is the best, he asked, the prayer of Jesus or the Gospels? It's all one and the same thing, I answered. What the Gospel is, that the prayer of Christ is also, for the divine name of Christ holds in itself the whole Gospel truth. The Holy Fathers say that the prayer of Christ is a summary of the Gospels. After our talk, we said prayers, and the Major began to read the Gospel of St. Mark from the beginning, and I listened and said the prayer in my heart. At 2 o'clock in the morning, he came to the end of the Gospel, and we parted and went to bed. As usual, I got up early in the morning. Everyone was still asleep. As soon as it began to get light, I eagerly seized my beloved love to kindness. With what gladness I opened it. I might have been getting a glimpse of my own father coming back from a far country, or a friend risen from the dead. I kissed it and thanked God for giving it back again. I began at once to read the Theoleptus of Philokalia, in the second part of the book. His teaching surprised me when he lays down that one and the same person at one and the same time should do 3 quite different things. Sit at the table, he says, supply your body with food, your ear with reading, and your mind with prayer. But the memory of the very happy evening the day before really gave me from my own experience the meaning of this thought. And here also the secret was revealed to me, that the mind and the heart are not one and the same thing. As soon as Officer Major rose, I went to thank him for his kindness and to say goodbye. He gave me tea and a coin and bade me farewell. I set off again, feeling very happy. I had gone over a mile when I remembered I had promised the soldiers a coin, and that now this coin had come to me in a quite unlooked-for way. Should I give it to them or not? At first, I thought, They beat you and they robbed you. Moreover, this money will be of no use to them whatever since they are under arrest." But afterward, other thoughts came to me. "Remember, it is written in the Bible, 'If thine enemy hunger, feed him.' 3. And Christ himself said, 'Love your enemies.' 4. And if any man will take away thy coat, let him have thy coat also." 5. That settled it for me. I went back, and just as I got to the house, all the convicts came out to start on the next stage of their march. I went quickly up to my 2 soldiers, handed them my coin, and said, "Repent and pray. Christ loves men. He will not forsake you." And with that, I left them and went on my way. After doing some 50 miles along the main road, I thought I would take a bypath so that I might be more by myself and read more quietly. For a long while, I walked through the heart of the forest, and but rarely came upon a village. At times, I passed almost the whole day sitting under the trees and carefully reading Philokalia, from which I gained a surprising amount of knowledge. My heart kindled with the desire for union with God by means of interior prayer, and I was eager to learn it under the guidance and control of my book. At the same time, I felt sad that I had no dwelling where I could give myself up quietly to reading all the while. During this time, I read my Bible also, and I felt that I began to understand it more clearly than before, when I had failed to understand many things in it and had often been prey to doubts. The Holy Fathers were right when they said that Philokalia is a key to the mysteries of Holy Scripture. With the help it gave me, I began to some extent to understand the hidden meaning of the Word of God. I began to see the meaning of such sayings as the inner secret man of the heart, true prayer worship in the Spirit, the kingdom is within us, the intercession of the Holy Spirit with groanings that can't be uttered, abide in me, give me thy heart, to put on Christ, the betrothal of the Spirit to our hearts, the cry from the depths of the heart, Abba, Father, and so on. And when with all this in mind I prayed with my heart, everything around me seemed delightful and marvelous. The trees, the grass, the birds, the earth, the air, the light seemed to be telling me that they existed for man's sake, that they witnessed to the love of God for man, that everything proved the love of God for man, that all things prayed to God and sang his praise. Thus it was that I came to understand what Philokalia calls the knowledge of the speech of all creatures, and I saw the means by which converse could be held with God's creatures. In this way I wandered about for a long while, coming at length to so lonely area that for 3 days I came upon no village at all. My supply of dried bread was used up, and I began to be very much cast down at the thought I might die of hunger. I began to pray my hardest in the depths of my heart. All fears went, and I entrusted myself to the will of God. My peace of mind came back to me, and I was in good spirits again. When I had gone a little further along the road, which here skirted a huge forest, I caught sight of a dog that came out of it and ran along in front of me. I called it, and it came up to me with a great show of friendliness. I was glad, and I thought, here is another case of God's goodness. No doubt there is a flock grazing in the forest, and this dog belongs to the shepherd. Or perhaps somebody is shooting in the neighborhood. Whichever it is, I shall be able to beg a piece of bread if nothing more, for I have eaten nothing for 24 hours. Or at least I shall be able to find out where the nearest village is. After jumping around me for some little time, and seeing that I was not going to give him anything, the dog trotted back into the forest along the narrow footpath by which he had come out. I followed, and a few hundred yards further on, looking between the trees, I saw him run into a hole, from which he looked out and began to bark. At the same time, a thin and pale middle-aged peasant came into view from behind a great tree. He asked me where I came from, and for my part, I wanted to know how he came to be there, and so we started a friendly talk. He took me into his mud hut and told me that he was a forester and that he looked after this particular wood, which had been sold for felling. He set bread and salt before me, and we began to talk. "How I envy you," said I, "being able to live so nicely alone in this quiet instead of being like me. I wander from place to place and rub along with all sorts of people." "You can stop here, too, if you like," he answered. "The old forester's hut is quite near here. It is half ruined, but still quite fit to live in summer. I suppose you have your passport. As far as bread goes, we shall always have plenty of that. It is brought to me every week from my village. This spring here never dries up. For my part, brother, I have eaten nothing but bread, and have drunk nothing but water for the last 10 years. This is how things stand. When autumn comes and the peasants have ended their work on the land, some 200 workmen will be coming to cut down this wood. Then I shall have no further business here, and you will not be allowed to stay either." As I listened to all this, I wanted to be at his feet. I did not know how to thank God for such goodness. In this unlooked-for way, my greatest wish was to be granted to me. There were still over 4 months before next autumn. During all that time, I could enjoy the silence and peace needed for a close reading of Philokalia in order to study and learn ceaseless prayer in the heart. So I very gladly stayed there, to live during that time in the hut he showed me. I talked further with his simple brother, who gave me accommodation, and he told me about his life and his ideas. I had quite a good position in the life of our village, he said. I had a workshop where I dyed fustian and linen, and I lived comfortably enough, though not without sin. I often cheated in business. I was a false swearer. I was abusive. I used to drink and quarrel. In our village there was an old dean who had a very old book on the Last Judgment. He used to go from house to house and read from it, and he was paid something for doing so. He came to me too. Give him 3 pence and a glass of wine into the bargain, and he would go on reading all night till cock-crow. There I would sit at my work and listen while he read about the torments that await us in hell. I heard how the living will be changed and the dead rose, how God will come down to judge the world, how the angels will sound the trumpets. I heard of the fire and pitch, and of the worm which will devour sinners. One day as I listened, I was seized with horror, and I said to myself, what if these torments come upon me? I will set to work to save my soul. It may be that by prayer I can avoid the results of my sins. I thought about this for a long time. Then I gave up my work, sold my house, and as I was alone in the world, I got a place as forester here, and all I ask of my world is bread, clothes, and some candles for my prayers. I have been living like this for over 10 years now. I eat only once a day, and then nothing but bread and water. I get up at cock-crow, make my devotions, and say my prayers before the holy icons with 7 candles burning. When I make my rounds in the forest during the day, I wear iron chains weighing 60 pounds next to my skin. I never grumble, drink neither wine nor beer. I never quarrel with anybody at all, and I have had nothing to do with women and girls all life. At first, this sort of life pleased me, but lately, other thoughts have come into my mind, and I can't get away from them. God only knows if I shall be able to pray my sins away in this fashion, and it's a hard life. And is everything written in that book true? How can a dead man rise again? Supposing he has been dead over 100 years, and not even his ashes are left. Who knows if there is really hell or not? What more is known of a man after he dies and rots? Perhaps the book was written by priests and masters to make us poor fools afraid and keep us quiet. What if we plague ourselves for nothing, and give up all our pleasure in vain? Suppose there is no such thing as another life. What then? Isn't it better to enjoy one's earthly life, and take it easily and happily? Ideas of this kind often worry me, and I don't know but what I shall not someday go back to my old work. I heard him with pity. They say, I thought, that it is only the learned and the clever that are free thinkers and believe in nothing. Yet here is one of us, even a simple peasant, and prey to such unbelief. The kingdom of darkness throws open its gates to everyone, it seems, and maybe attacks the simple-minded most easily. Therefore, one must learn wisdom and strengthen oneself with the Word of God as much as possible against the enemy of the soul. So, with the object of helping his brother and doing all I could to strengthen his faith, I took Philokalia out of my bag. Turning to the 109th chapter of Isaiah the Solitary, I read it to him. I set out to prove to him the uselessness and vanity of avoiding sin merely from fear of the tortures of hell. I told him that the soul could be freed from sinful thoughts only by guarding the mind and cleansing the heart, and that this could be done by interior prayer. I added that according to the Holy Fathers, one who performs saving works simply from the fear of hell follows the way of bondage, and he who does the same just in order to be rewarded with the kingdom of heaven follows the path of a bargainer with God. The one they call a slave, the other a hireling. But God wants us to come to him as sons to their Father. He wants us to behave ourselves honorably from love for him and zeal for his service. He wants us to find our happiness in uniting ourselves with him, in a saving union of mind and heart. However much you spend yourself on treating your body hard, I said, you will never find peace of mind that way. And unless you have God in your mind and the ceaseless prayer of Christ in your heart, you will always be likely to fall back into sin for the very slightest reason. Set to work, my brother, upon the ceaseless saying of the prayer of Jesus. You have such a good chance of doing so here in this lonely place, and in a short while you will see the gain of it. No godless thoughts will then be able to get at you, and the true faith and love for Christ will be shown to you. You will then understand how the dead will be raised, and you will see the last judgment in its true light. The prayer will make you feel such lightness and such bliss in your heart that you will be astonished at it yourself, and your wholesome way of life will be neither dull nor troublesome to you. Then I went on to explain to him, as well as I could, how to begin, and how to go on ceaselessly with the prayer for Jesus, and how the Word of God and the writings of the Holy Fathers teach us about it. He agreed with it all, and seemed to me to be calmer. Then I left him and shut myself up in the hut which he had shown me. Ah, how delighted I was, how calmly happy when I crossed the threshold of that lonely retreat, or rather, that tomb. It seemed to me like a magnificent palace filled with every consolation and delight. With tears of rapture, I gave thanks to God and said to myself, here in this peace and quietude, I must seriously set to work at my task and beseech God to give me light. So I started by reading through Philokalia, again with great care, from beginning to end. Before long I had read the whole of it, and I saw how much wisdom, holiness, and depth of insight there was in this book. Still, so many matters were dealt with in it, and it contains such a lot of lessons from the Holy Fathers that I could not very well grasp it all, and take in as a single whole what was said about interior prayer. And this was what I chiefly wanted to know, so as to learn from it how to practice ceaseless self-acting prayer in the heart. This was my great desire, following the divine command in the Apostles' words, covet earnestly the best gifts, 6, and again, quench not the spirit, 7. I thought over the matter for a long time. What was to be done? My mind and my understanding were not equal to the task, and there was no one to explain. I made up my mind to besiege God with prayer. Maybe He would make me understand somehow. For 24 hours I did nothing but pray without stopping for a single moment. At last my thoughts were calmed, and I fell asleep. And then I dreamed that I was in my departed elder's cell, and that he was explaining Philokalia to me. The Holy Book is full of profound wisdom, he was saying. It is a secret treasury of the meaning of the hidden judgments of God. It is not everywhere, and to everyone that it is accessible, but it does give to each such guidance as he needs. To the wise, wise guidance. To the simple-minded, simple guidance. That is why your simple folk should not read the chapters one after the other, as they are arranged in the book. That order is for those who are instructed in theology. Those who are uninstructed, but who nevertheless desire to learn interior prayer from this book, should take things in this order. First of all, Read through the book of Nikephoros the monk, in part 2, then the whole book of Gregory of Sinai, except the short chapters. Simeon, the new theologian, on the 3 forms of prayer in his discourse on faith, and after that, the book of Callistus and Ignatius. In these fathers, there are full directions and teaching on interior prayer of the heart, in a form that everyone can understand. And if, in addition, you want to find a very understandable instruction on prayer, turn to part 4 and find the summarized pattern of prayer by the holiest Callistus, Patriarch of Constantinople. In my dream, I held the book in my hands and began to look for this passage, but I was quite unable to find it. Then he turned over a few pages himself and said, "Here it is. I will mark it for you." He picked up a piece of charcoal from the ground and made a mark in the margin, against the passage he had found. I listened to him with care and tried to fix in my mind everything he said, word for word. When I woke up, it was still dark. I lay still and in thought, went over my dream and all that my elder had said to me. God knows, thought I, whether it is really the spirit of my departed elder that I have seen, or whether it is only the outcome of my own thoughts, because they are so often taken up with Philokalia and my elder. With this doubt in my mind, I got up, for day was beginning to break, and what did I see? There, on the stone which served as a table in my hut, lay the book open at the very page which my elder had pointed out to me, and, in the margin, a charcoal mark, just as in my dream. Even the piece of charcoal itself was lying beside the book. I looked in astonishment, for I remembered clearly that the book was not there the evening before, that it had been put, shut, under my pillow, and also I was quite certain that before there had been nothing where I now saw the charcoal mark. It was this which made me sure of the truth of my dream, and that my revered master of blessed memory was pleasing to God. I set about reading Philokalia in the exact order he had bidden. I read it once, and again a second time, and this reading kindled in my soul a zealous desire to make what I had read a matter of practical experience. I saw clearly what interior prayer means, how it is to be reached, what the fruits of it are, how it filled one's heart and soul with delight, and how one could tell whether that delight comes from God, from nature, or from temptation. So I began by searching out my heart in the way Simeon the new theologian teaches. With my eyes shut, I gazed in thought, that is, in imagination, upon my heart. I tried to picture it there in the left side of my chest and to listen carefully to its beating. I started doing this several times a day, for half an hour at a time, and, at first, I felt nothing but a sense of darkness. But little by little, after a fairly short time, I was able to picture my heart and to note its movement, and further with the help of my breathing, I could put into it and draw from it the prayer of Christ in the manner taught by the saints, Gregory of Sinai, Callistus, and Ignatius. When drawing the air in, I looked in spirit into my heart and said, Lord Christ, and when breathing out again, I said, Have mercy on me. I did this at first for an hour at a time, then for 2 hours, then for as long as I could, and in the end, almost all day long. If any difficulty arose, if sloth or doubt came upon me, I hastened to take up Philokalia and read again those parts which dealt with the work of the heart, and then once more I felt ardor and zeal for the prayer. When about 3 weeks had passed, I felt a pain in my heart, and then a most delightful warmth, as well as consolation and peace. This aroused me still more, and spurred me on more and more to give great care to the saying of the prayer, so that all thoughts were taken up with it, and I felt very great joy. From this time I began to have from time to time a number of different feelings in my heart and mind. Sometimes my heart would feel as though it were bubbling with joy. Such lightness, freedom, and consolation were in it. Sometimes I felt a burning love for Christ and for all God's creatures. Sometimes my eyes brimmed over with tears of thankfulness to God, who was so merciful to me, a wretched sinner. Sometimes my understanding, which had been so stupid before, was given so much light that I could easily grasp and dwell upon matters of which up to now I had not been able even to think at all. Sometimes that sense of a warm gladness in my heart spread throughout my whole being, and I was deeply moved as the fact of the presence of God everywhere was brought home to me. Sometimes, by calling upon the name of Christ, I was overwhelmed with bliss, and now I knew the meaning of the words, "The kingdom of God is within you." 8. From having all these and other like feelings, I noted that interior prayer bears fruit in 3 ways: in the spirit, in the feelings, and in revelations. In the first, for instance, is the sweetness of the love of God, inward peace, the gladness of mind, purity of thought, and the sweet remembrance of God. In the second, the pleasant warmth of the heart, fullness of delight in all one's limbs, the joyous bubbling in the heart, lightness and courage, the joy of living, power not to feel sickness and sorrow. And in the last, light given to the mind, understanding of Holy Scripture, knowledge of the speech of created things, freedom from fuss and vanity, knowledge of the joy of the inner life, and finally, certainty of the nearness of God and of His love for us. After spending 5 months in this lonely life of prayer and such happiness as this, I grew so used to the prayer that I went on with it all the time. In the end, I felt it going on of its own accord, within my mind and in the depths of my heart, without any urging on my part. Not only when I was awake, but even during sleep, just the same thing went on. Nothing broke into it, and it never stopped, even for a single moment, whatever I might be doing. My soul was always giving thanks to God, and my heart melted away with unceasing happiness. The time came for the wood to be felled. People began to come along in crowds, and I had to leave my quiet dwelling. I thanked the forester, said some prayers, kissed the bit of the earth which God had deigned to give me, unworthy of His mercy as I was, shouldered my bag of books, and set off. For a very long while I wandered about in different places until I reached Irkutsk. The self-acting prayer in my heart was a comfort and consolation all the way. Whatever I met with, it never ceased to gladden me, though it did so to different degrees at different times. Wherever I was, whatever I did or gave myself up to, it never hindered things, nor was hindered by them. If I am working at anything, the prayer goes on by itself in my heart, and the work gets on faster. If I am listening carefully to anything or reading, the prayer never stops. At one and the same time, I am aware of both, just as if I were made into 2 people, or as if there were 2 souls in my one body. Lord, what a mysterious thing man is! How manifold are Thy works, O Lord! In wisdom hast Thou made them all. 9. All sorts of things and many strange adventures happened to me as I went on my way. If I were to start telling them all, I should not end in 24 hours. Thus, for example, one winter evening, as I was going alone through the forest toward a village which I could see about a mile away, and where I was to spend the night, a great wolf suddenly came in sight and made for me. I had in my hand my elder's woolen rosary, which I always carried with me. I struck the animal with that. Well, the rosary was torn out of my hands and got twisted around the wolf's neck. He leaped away from me, but in jumping through a thorn bush, he got his hind paws caught. The rosary also caught on a bough of a dead tree, and he began dashing himself about. But he could not free himself because the rosary was tightening around his throat. I crossed myself in faith and went forward to free him, chiefly because I was afraid that if he tore my rosary away and ran off with it, I should lose my precious rosary. And sure enough, as soon as I got hold of the rosary, the wolf snapped it and fled without leaving a trace. I thanked God, with my blessed elder in mind, and I came safe and sound to the village, where I asked for a night's lodging at an inn. I went into the house. 2 men, one of them old and the other middle-aged and heavily built, were sitting at a table in a corner drinking tea. They looked as though they were not just simple folk, and I asked the peasant who was with their horses who they were. He told me that the elder of the two was a teacher at an elementary school, and the other the clerk of the county court. They were both people of the better class. He was driving them to a fair about a dozen miles away. After sitting a while, I asked the hostess to lend me a needle and thread, came over into the candlelight, and set about mending my broken rosary. The clerk watched what I was doing and said, "I suppose you have been praying so hard that your rosary broke." "It was not I who broke it," I answered. "It was a wolf." "What? A wolf? Do wolves say their prayers too?" said he jokingly. I told them all that had happened, and how precious the rosary was to me. The clerk laughed again, saying, "Miracles are always happening with you sham saints. Of what was there sacred about a thing like that? The simple fact was that you brandished something at the wolf, and he was frightened and went off. Of course, dogs and wolves take fright at the gesture of throwing, and getting caught on a tree is common enough. That sort of thing very often happens. Where is the miracle?" But the old man answered him thus, "Don't jump to conclusions like that, sir. You miss the deeper aspects of the incident. For my part, I see in this peasant's story the mystery of nature, both sensuous and spiritual." "How's that?" asked the clerk. "Well, like this. Although you have not received the highest education, you have, of course, learned the sacred history of the Old and New Testaments, as summarized in the questions and answers used at school. You remember that when our father Adam was still in a state of holy innocence, all the animals were obedient to him. They approached him in fear and received from him their names. The old man to whom this rosary belonged was a saint. Now what is the meaning of sanctity? For the sinner, it means nothing else than a return through effort and discipline to the state of innocence of the first man. When the soul is made holy, the body becomes holy also. The rosary had always been in the hands of a sanctified person. The effect of the contact of his hands and the exhalation of his body was to inoculate it with holy power, the power of the first man's innocence. That is the mystery of spiritual nature. All animals in natural succession down to the present time have experienced this power, and they experience it through smelling. For in all animals, the nose is the chief organ of sensation. That is the mystery of sensacious nature. You learned people go on about strength and wisdom, said the clerk, but we take things more simply. Fill up a glass of vodka and tip it off. That will give you strength enough. And he went over to the cupboard. That's your business, said the schoolmaster, but please leave learning to us. I liked the way he spoke, and I came up closer to him and said, May I venture, Father, to tell you a little more about my elder? And so I told him about the appearance of my elder while I was sleeping, the teaching he had given me, and the charcoal mark which he had made in Philokalia. He listened with care to what I told him. But the clerk, who lay stretched out on a bench, muttered, It's true enough you can lose your wits through reading the Bible too much. That's what it is. Do you suppose a boogeyman comes and marks your books at night? You simply let the book drop on the ground yourself while you were asleep, and some soot made a dirty mark on it. There's your miracle. Eh, you tricksters? I've come across plenty of your kidney. Muttering this sort of thing, the clerk rolled over with his face to the wall and went to sleep. So I turned to the schoolmaster, saying, If I may, I will show you the actual book. Look, it is really marked, not just dirtied with soot. I took it out of my bag and showed him. What surprises me, said I, is how a spirit without a body could have picked up a piece of charcoal and written with it. He looked at the mark and said, This also is a spiritual mystery. I will explain it to you. Look here now. When spirits appear in a bodily form to a living person, they compose themselves a body which can be felt from the air and the world stuff, and later on give back to the elements again what they had borrowed from them. Just as the atmosphere possesses elasticity, the power to contract and expand, so the soul, clothed in it, can take up anything, and act and write. But what is this book of yours? Let me have a look at it. He began to look at it, and it opened at the sermons of St. Simeon, the new theologian. Ah, this must be a theological work. I have never seen it before, he said. It is almost wholly made up, I told him, of teaching on interior prayer of the heart in the name of Christ. It is set forth herein full detail by 25 Holy Fathers. Ah, I know something of interior prayer, he answered. I bowed before him, down to the very ground, and begged him to speak to me about interior prayer. Well, it says in the New Testament that man and all creation are subject to vanity, not willingly, and sigh with effort and desire to enter into the liberty of the children of God, the mysterious sighing of creation, the innate aspiration of every soul toward God. That is exactly what interior prayer is. There is no need to learn it. It is innate in every one of us. But what is one to do to find it in oneself, to feel it in one's heart, to acknowledge it by one's will, to take it and feel the happiness and light of it, and so to reach salvation? I asked. I don't know whether there is anything on the subject in theological books, he said. Well, here it is. It is all explained here, I answered, showing him my book again. The schoolmaster noted the title and said he would certainly have one sent from Tobolsk and study it. After that, we went our different ways. I thanked God for this talk with the schoolmaster and prayed that God would so order things that the clerk also might read Philokalia, even if only once, and let him find salvation through it. Another time, it was in spring. I passed through a village where I stayed with the priest. He was a worthy man, living alone, and I spent 3 days with him. Having watched me for that length of time, he said to me, "Stay here. I will pay you anything." I need a trustworthy man. As you see, we are starting to build a stone church here near the old wooden chapel, and I have been looking for some honest person to keep an eye on the workmen and stay in the chapel in charge of the offerings for the building fund. It is exactly the thing for you and would just suit your way of life. You will be alone in the chapel and say your prayers. There is a quiet little room for a verger there. Please stay, at any rate, until the building is finished. For a long while I refused, but in the end I had to yield to the good priest's begging, and I stayed there till the autumn, taking up my abode in the chapel. At first I found it quiet and apt for prayer, although a great many people came to the chapel, especially on holidays, some to say their prayers, some because they were bored, and others again with the idea of pilfering from the collection plate. I read my Bible and my love to kindness every evening, and some of them saw this and started talking to me about it or asked me to read aloud. After a while, I noticed that a young village girl often came to the chapel and spent a long while in prayer. Listening to her whisperings, I found that the prayers she was saying were some of them strange to me, and others the usual prayers in a garbled form. I asked where she learned such things, and she told me it was from her mother, who was a churchwoman, but that her father belonged to a sect that had no priesthood. Feeling sorry for her, I advised her to read her prayers in the right form as given by the tradition of Holy Church. Then I taught her the right wording of the Lord's Prayer and of the Hail Mary, and finally, I advised her to say the prayer of Christ as often as she could, for that brought one nearer to God than any other prayer. The girl took note of what I said and set about it quite simply. And what happened? A short time afterward, she told me that she was so used to the prayer that she felt it draw her all the time, that she used it as much as she could, that she enjoyed the prayer at the time, and that afterward she was filled with gladness and a wish to begin using it again. I was glad of this and advised her to go on with it more and more. Summer was drawing to a close. Many visitors to the chapel came to see me also, not only to be read to and to ask for advice, but with all sorts of worldly troubles, and even to ask about things they had mislaid or lost. Some of them seemed to take me for a wizard. The girl I spoke about also came to me one day in a state of great distress and worry, not knowing what to do. Her father wanted to make her marry a man of his own religion, and they were to be married not by a priest, but by a mere peasant belonging to the same sect. How could that be a lawful marriage? Wouldn't it be the same thing as fornication? Cried the girl. She had made up her mind to run away somewhere or other. But, said I, where to? They would be sure to find you again. They will look everywhere. and you won't be able to hide anywhere from them. You had better pray earnestly to God to turn your father from his purpose, and to guard your soul against sin and heresy. That is a much sounder plan than running away." Thus time passed away, and all this noise and fuss began to be more than I could bear, and at last, at the end of summer, I made up my mind to leave the chapel and go on with my traveling as before. I told the priest what was in my mind, saying, "You know my plans, Father. I must have quiet for prayer, and here it is very disturbing and bad for me, and I have spent the whole summer here. Now let me go, and give your blessing on my lonely journey." But the priest did not want to let me go, and tried to get me to stay. "What is there to hinder your praying here? Your work is nothing to speak of, beyond stopping in the chapel. You have your daily bread. Say your prayers, then all day and all night, if you like, and live with God. You are useful here. You don't go in for silly gossip with the people who come here. You are a source of profit to the church. All that is worth more in God's sight than your prayers all by yourself. Why do you always want to be alone? Common prayer is pleasanter. God did not create man to think of himself only, but that men should help each other, and lead each other along the path to salvation, each according to his strength. Think of the saints and the fathers of the church. They bustled about day and night. They cared for the needs of the church. They used to preach all over the place. They didn't sit down alone and hide from people. Everyone has his own gift from God," I answered. "There have been many preachers, Father, but there have also been many hermits. Everyone does what he can, as he sees his own path, with the thought that God himself shows him the way of his salvation. How do you get over the fact that many of the saints gave up their positions as bishops or priests or the rule of a monastery, and went into the desert to get away from the fuss which comes from living with other people? Saint Isaac the Syrian, for instance, fled from the flock whose bishop he was, and the venerable Athanasius of Athos left his large monastery just because to them these places were a source of temptation, and they sincerely believed our Lord's saying, 'What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and lose his own soul?' 10. "Ah, but they were saints," said the priest. "And if," I answered, "the very saints took steps to guard themselves against the dangers of mingling with people, what else, I ask you, can a feeble sinner do?" So, in the end, I said goodbye to this good priest, and he, out of the love in his heart, sent me on my way. Some 6 miles farther on, I stopped for the night at a village. At the inn there, I found a peasant hopelessly ill, and I advised those who were with him to see that he had the last sacraments. They agreed, and toward morning sent for the parish priest. I stayed there too, because I wanted to worship and pray in the presence of the holy gifts, and going out into the street, sat down on the village outskirt to wait for the priest to come. All at once I was astonished to see running toward me from the backyard the girl who used to pray in the chapel. "What brings you here?" I asked. They had fixed the day of my betrothal to the man I told you of, so I left them. And kneeling before me, she went on, "Have pity on me. Take me with you, and put me into some convent or other. I don't want to be married. I want to live in a convent and say the Christ prayer. They will listen to you and take me." "Goodness," I exclaimed, "and where am I to take you? I don't know a single convent in this neighborhood. Besides, I can't take you anywhere without a passport. For one thing, you wouldn't be taken anywhere, and for another, it would be quite impossible for you to hide nowadays. You would be caught at once and sent home again and punished as a tramp into the bargain. You had far better go home and say your prayers there, and if you don't want to marry, make out you are ill. The Holy Mother Clementa did that, and so did the Venerable Marina when she took refuge in a men's convent. There are many other cases of the same thing. It is called a saving pretense. While all this was happening and we sat talking the matter over, we saw 4 men driving up the road with a pair of horses and coming straight toward us at a gallop. They seized the girl and put her in the cart, and one of them drove off with her. The other 3 tied my hands together and haled me back to the village where I had spent the summer. Their only reply to everything I said for myself was to shout, "We'll teach the little saint to seduce young girls." That evening they brought me to the village court, put my feet in irons, and lodged me in jail to await my trial in the morning. The priest heard that I was in prison and came to see me. He brought me some supper and comforted me, saying that he would do what he could for me and give his word as a spiritual father that I was not the sort of person they thought. After sitting with me for a while, he went away. The magistrate came later in the evening, driving through the village on his way to somewhere else, and stopped at the deputy's house, where they told him what had happened. He bade the peasants come together and had me brought to the house which was used as a court. We went in and stood to wait. In comes the magistrate, blustering, and sits down on the table with his hat on. "Hi, Epiphany," he shouts. "Did the girl, this daughter of yours, run off with anything from your house?" "No, sir, nothing," was the answer. "Has she been found out doing anything wrong with that fool there?" "No, sir." "Well then, this is my decision and my judgment in the matter. You deal with your daughter yourself, and as for this fellow, we will teach him a lesson tomorrow and throw him out of the village, with strict orders never to show his face here again. So that's that." So saying, he got down from the table and went off to bed, while I was taken back to jail. Early in the morning, 2 policemen came, flogged me, and drove me out of the village. I went off, thanking God that he counted me worthy to suffer for his name. This comforted me and gave me still more warmth and glow to my ceaseless interior prayer. None of these things made me feel at all cast down. It was as though they happened to someone else, and I merely watched them. Even the flogging was within my power to bear. The prayer brought sweetness into my heart, and made me unaware, so to speak, of everything else. A mile or 2 farther on, I met the girl's mother, coming home from the market with what she had bought. While seeing me, she told me that the son-in-law-to-be had withdrawn his suit. You see, he is annoyed with Akulka for having run away from him. Then she gave me some bread and patties, and I went on my way. The weather was fine and dry, and I had no wish to spend the night in a village. So, when I came upon 2 fenced-in haystacks as I went through the forest that evening, I lay down beneath them for a night's lodging. I fell asleep and dreamed that I was walking along and reading a chapter of St. Anthony the Great from Philokalia. Suddenly, my elder overtook me and said, "Don't read that. Read this," and pointed to these words in the 35th chapter of St. John of Carpathos. A teacher submits at times to ignominy and endures pain for the sake of his spiritual children. And again, he made me know in the 41st chapter, those who give themselves most earnestly to prayer, it is they who become the prey of terrible and violent temptations. Then he said, "Take courage and don't be downcast. Remember the apostles' words, 'Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world.' 11. You see that you have now had experience of the truth that no temptation is beyond man's strength to resist, and that with the temptation, God makes also a way of escape. 12. Reliance upon this divine help has strengthened holy men of prayer and led them on to greater zeal and ardor. They not only devoted their own lives to ceaseless prayer, but also out of the love of their hearts, revealed it and taught it to others as opportunity occurred. St. Gregory of Thessaloniki speaks of this as follows: Not only should we ourselves, in accordance with God's will, pray unceasingly in the name of Christ, but we are bound to reveal it and teach it to others, to everyone in general, religious and secular, learned and simple, men, women, and children, and to inspire them all with zeal for prayer without ceasing. In the same way, the Venerable Callistus Telecutis says, one ought not to keep thoughts about God, for example, interior prayer, and what is learned by contemplation, and the means of raising the soul on high, simply in one's own mind, but one should make notes of it, put it into writing for general use, and with a loving motive. And the Scriptures say in this connection, brother is helped by brother, like a strong and lofty city. 13. Only in this case it is above all things necessary to avoid self-praise and to take care that the seed of divine teaching is not sown to the wind. I woke up feeling great joy in my heart and strength in my soul, and I went on my way. A long while after this, something else happened, which also I will tell you about if you like. One day, it was the 24th of March to be exact, I felt a very urgent wish to make my communion the next day, that is, on the feast of the Annunciation of Our Lady. I asked whether the church was far away, and was told it was about 20 miles. So I walked for the rest of that day, and all the next night, in order to get there in time for matins. The weather was as bad as it could be. It snowed and rained. There was a strong wind, and it was very cold. On my way, I had to cross a small stream, and just as I got to the middle, the ice gave way under my feet, and I was plunged into the water up to my waist. Drenched like this, I came to matins and stood through it, and also through the liturgy, which followed, and at which, by God's grace, I made my communion. In order to spend the day quietly and without spoiling my spiritual happiness, I begged the verger to allow me to stay in his little room until the next morning. I was happier than I can tell all that day, and my heart was full of joy. I lay on the plank bed in that unheated room as though I were resting on Abraham's bosom. The prayer was very active. The love of Christ and of the Mother of God seemed to surge into my heart in waves of sweetness and steep my soul in consolation and triumph. At nightfall, I was seized with violent rheumatic pains in my legs, and that brought to my mind that they were soaking wet. I took no notice of it, and set my heart the more to prayer, so that I no longer felt the pain. In the morning, when I wanted to get up, I found that I could not move my legs. They were quite paralyzed and as feeble as bits of string. The verger dragged me down off the bed by main force, and so there I sat for 2 days without moving. On the 3rd day, the verger set about turning me out of his room. "For," said he, "supposing you die here, what a fuss there will be." With the greatest of difficulty, I somehow or other crawled along on my arms and dragged myself to the steps of the church, and lay there. And there I stayed like that for a couple of days. The people who went by passed me without taking the slightest notice either of me or of my pleadings. In the end, a peasant came up to me and sat down and talked, and after a while he asked, "What will you give me if I cure you?" I had just exactly the same thing once, so I know medicine for it. "I have nothing to give you," I answered, "but what have you got in your bag?" "Only dried bread and some books." "Well, what about working for me just for 1 summer, if I cure you?" "I can't do any work, as you see. I have only the use of 1 arm. The other is almost entirely withered." "Then what can you do?" "Nothing, beyond the fact that I can read and write." "Ah, write! Well, teach my little boy to write. He can read a little, and I want him to be able to write, too. But it costs such a lot, they want 20 coins to teach him." I agreed to this, and with the verger's help, he carried me away and put me in an old empty bathhouse in his backyard. Then he set about curing me, and this was his method. He picked up from the floors, the yards, the cesspools, the best part of a bushel of various sorts of putrid bones, bones of cattle, of birds, all sorts. He washed them, broke them up small with a stone, and put them into a great earthen pot. This he covered with a lid which had a small hole in it and placed upside down on an empty jar sunk in the ground. He smeared the upper pot with a thick coating of clay, and making a pile of wood around it, he set fire to this and kept it burning for more than 24 hours, saying as he fed the fire, "Now we'll get some tar from the bones." The next day he took the lower jar out of the ground. There had dripped into it, through the hole in the lid of the other jar, about a pint of thick, reddish, oily liquid, with a strong smell, like living raw meat. As for the bones left in the jar, from being black and putrid, they had become white and clean and transparent, like mother of pearl. I rubbed my legs with this liquid 5 times a day. and lo and behold, 24 hours later, I found I could move my toes. Another day, and I could bend my legs and straighten them again. On the 5th day, I stood on my feet, and with the help of a stick, walked about the yard. In a word, in a week's time, my legs had become fully as strong as they were before. I thanked God and mused upon the mysterious power which He has given His creatures. Dry, putrid bones, almost brought to dust, yet keeping such vital force, color, smell, power of acting on living bodies, and as it was giving life to bodies that are half dead, it is a pledge of the future resurrection of the body. How I would like to point this out to that forester with whom I lived, in view of his doubts about the general resurrection. Having in this way got better from my illness, I began to teach the boy. Instead of the usual copybook work, he wrote out the prayer of Jesus. I made him copy it, showing him how to set out the words nicely. I found teaching the lad restful, for during the daytime he worked for the steward of an estate nearby, and could only come to me while the steward slept, that is, from daybreak till liturgy. He was a bright boy, and soon began to write fairly well. His employer saw him writing, and asked him who had taught him. "A one-armed wanderer who lives in our old bathhouse," said the boy. The steward, who was a Pole, was interested and came to have a look at me. He found me reading Philokalia and started to talk by asking what I was reading. I showed him the book. "Ah," said he, "that's Philokalia. I've seen the book before at our priest's when I lived at Vilna. They tell me, however, that it contains odd sorts of schemes and tricks for a prayer written down by the Greek monks. It's like those fanatics in India and Bokhara who sit down and blow themselves out trying to get a sort of tickling in their hearts, and in their stupidity take this bodily feeling for prayer and look upon it as the gift of God. All that is necessary to fulfill one's duty to God is to pray simply, to stand and say the Our Father as Christ taught us. That puts you right for the whole day, but not to go on over and over again to the same tune. That, if I may say so, is enough to drive you mad. Besides, it's bad for your heart." "Don't think in that way about this holy book, sir," I answered. "It was not written by simple Greek monks, but by great and very holy men of olden times, men whom your church honors also, such as Anthony the Great, Macarius the Great, Mark the spiritual athlete, John Chrysostom, and others. It was from them that the monks of India and Bokhara took over the heart method of interior prayer, only they quite spoiled and garbled it in doing so, as my elder explained to me. In the love to kindness, all the teaching about the practice of prayer in the heart is taken from the Word of God, from the Holy Bible, in which the same Christ who bade us say the Our Father taught also a ceaseless prayer in the heart. For he said, Thou shalt love the Lord, thy God, with all thy heart, and with all thy mind. 14. Watch and pray. 15. Abide in me, and I in you. 16. And the Holy Fathers, calling to witness the holy King David's words in the Psalms, O taste and see how gracious the Lord is. 17. Explain the passage thus. The Christian man ought to use every possible means of seeking and finding delight in prayer, and ceaselessly to look for consolation in it, and not be content with simply saying, Our Father once a day. Let me read to you how these saints blame those who don't strive to reach the gladness of the prayer of the heart. They write that such do wrong for 3 reasons. Firstly, because they show themselves against the Scriptures inspired by God, and secondly, because they don't set before themselves a higher and more perfect state of soul to be reached. They are content with outward virtues only, and can't hunger and thirst for the truth, and therefore miss the blessedness and joy in the Lord. Thirdly, because by letting their mind dwell upon themselves and their own outward virtues, they often slip into temptation and pride, and so fall away. It is sublime, what you are reading, said the steward, but it's hard for us ordinary lay people, I think. Well, I will read you something simpler, about how people of good will, even if living in the world, may learn how to pray without ceasing. I found the sermon on George, the youth, by Simeon the new theologian, and read it to him from Philokalia. This pleased him, and he said, "Give me that book to read at my leisure, and I will have a good look into it sometime." "I will let you have it for 24 hours with pleasure," I answered, "but not for long, because I read it every day, and I just can't live without it." "Well then, at least copy out for me what you have just read. I will pay you for your trouble." "I don't want payment," I said. "I will write that out for you for love's sake, and in the hope that God will give you a longing for prayer." I at once, and with pleasure, made a copy of the sermon I had read. He read it to his wife, and both of them were pleased with it. And so it came about that at times they would send for me, and I would go, taking Philokalia with me, and read to them while they sat drinking tea and listening. Once they asked me to stay for dinner. The steward's wife, who was a kindly old lady, was sitting with us at the table eating some fried fish, when by some mischance she got a bone lodged in her throat. Nothing we could do gave her any relief, and nothing would move the bone. Her throat gave her so much pain that a couple of hours later she had to go and lie down. The doctor, who lived 20 miles away, was sent for, and as by this time it was evening, I went home feeling very sorry for her. That night, while I was sleeping lightly, I heard my elder's voice. I saw no figure, but I heard him say to me, "The man you are living with cured you. Why then do you not help the steward's wife? God has bidden us feel for our neighbor." "I would help her gladly," I answered, "but how? I know no means whatever." "Well, this is what you must do. From her very earliest years she has had a dislike of oil. She not only will not taste it, but can't bear even the smell of it without being sick. So make her drink a spoonful of oil. It will make her vomit. The bone will come away. The oil will soothe the sore the bone has made in her throat, and she will be well again. And what if she dislikes it? She will refuse to drink it. Get the steward to hold her head, and pour it suddenly into her mouth, even if you have to use force." I woke up, and went straight off and told the steward all this in detail. "What good can your oil do now?" said he. "She is hoarse and delirious, and her neck is all swollen." "Well, at any rate, let us try. Even if it doesn't help, oil is at least harmless as a medicine." He poured some into a wineglass, and somehow or other we got her to swallow it. She was violently sick at once, and soon vomited up the bone and some blood. She began to feel easier and fell into a deep sleep. In the morning I went to ask after her, and found her sitting quietly taking her tea. Both she and her husband were full of wonder at the way she had been cured, and even greater than that was their surprise that her dislike of oil had been told me in a dream. Far apart from themselves, not a soul knew of the fact. Just then the doctor also drove up, and the steward told him what had happened to his wife, and I in my turn told him how the peasant had cured my legs. The doctor listened to it all and then said, "Neither the one case nor the other is great to be wondered at. It is the same natural force which operated in both cases. Still, I shall make a note of it." And he took out a pencil and wrote in his notebook. After this, the report quickly spread through the whole neighborhood that I was a prophet and a doctor and a wizard. There began a ceaseless stream of visitors from all parts to bring their affairs and their troubles to my notice. They brought me presents and began to treat me with respect and to look after my comfort. I bore this for a week, and then, fearing I should fall into vainglory and harmful distractions, I left the place in secret by night. Thus, once more, I set out on my lonely way, feeling as light as if a great weight had been taken off my shoulders. The prayer comforted me more and more, so that at times my heart bubbled over with boundless love for Christ, and from my delight in this, streams of consolation seemed to flow through my whole being. The remembrance of Christ was so stamped upon my mind that as I dwelt upon the gospel story, I seemed to see its events before my very eyes. I was moved even to tears of joy, and sometimes felt such gladness in my heart that I am at a loss even how to tell of it. It happened at times that for 3 days together I came upon no human dwelling, and in the uplifting of my spirit, I felt as though I were alone on the earth. one wretched sinner before the merciful and man-loving God. This sense of being alone was a comfort to me, and it made me feel my delight in prayer much more than when I was mixing with a crowd of people. Finally, I reached Irkutsk. When I had prayed before the relics of St. Innocent, I began to wonder where I should go now. I did not want to stay there for a long while. It was a town in which many people lived. I was walking thoughtfully along the street when I came upon a certain merchant belonging to the place. He stopped me, saying, "Are you a wanderer? Why not come home with me?" We went off together, and he took me into his richly furnished house and asked me about myself. I told him all about my travels, and then he said, "You ought to go on traveling to Jerusalem. There are shrines there the like of which are not to be found anywhere else." "I should be only too glad to do so," I answered, "but I haven't the money. I can get along on dry land till I come to the sea, but I have no means of paying for a sea voyage, and it takes a good deal of money. How would you like me to find the money for you?" "I have already sent one of our townsfolk there, an old man, last year," said the merchant. I fell at his feet, and he went on to say, "Listen, I will give you a letter to my son at Odessa. He lives there and has business connections with Constantinople. He will be pleased to give you a passage on one of the vessels to Constantinople, and to tell his agents there to book a passage to Jerusalem for you on another boat and pay for it. That is not so very expensive." I was overcome with joy when I heard this, and thanked my benefactor for his kindness. Even more did I thank God for showing me such fatherly love, and for his care for me, a wretched sinner, who did no good either to himself or to anyone else, and ate the bread of others in idleness. I stayed 3 days with this kindly merchant. As he had promised, he wrote me a letter to his son. So here I am now, on my way to Odessa, planning to go on till I reach Jerusalem. But I don't know whether the Lord will allow me to venerate his life-giving tomb.